Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Morgan.
Um, how are you right now?
I'm doing all right. I think I usually always write my blogs before we record. So there's a lot of self-reflection. And
Mm,
I think in the self-reflection, there's a lot of ups and downs, but I always try and put a positive spin on it. And I think this week was a lot about embracing change,
mm,
and that's what I'm going into this next week thinking. But how are you doing?
mm. I'm I'm good. I'm feeling still refreshed since last week and my time away. So that's actually like feeling really, I'm a little like nervous. I'm like, when is this gonna stop? When is the refreshness gonna stop? And when am I start gonna like when is the stress gonna start building again? It's only a matter of time, but I'm enjoying it while it's here and embracing my own changes
Yeah.
and embracing yeah, my schedule is, I mean, it's packed right now. So
Yep.
yeah, this is kind of my first week where I'm doing it all. And so I'm
Well,
just
you're always doing
embracing.
it all.
I am always doing it all, but am I doing it all for me?
Yeah, that's the big question. Yeah.
Yes. So I think the next couple of weeks will be really good to see how I maintain all of the changes, and we can continue talking about how changes affect us, because I really spoke about that too in one of my blogs.
Yeah.
Um and we love Sarah Blondin, right?
Hmm.
She's one of our fave guided meditation speakers on Insight Finder. If you don't follow, you should, because I cry basically every single time she just starts talking on the Insight Finder. I'm like, okay. Yeah, every time.
Same. Yeah,
It's
like literally.
so freeing, right? I'm like, oh, that was so good every time. So I actually started her Coming Home to Yourself series. It's a 10-day
Uh,
meditation series that she offers.
is that free or do you pay for it?
I paid.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I kept seeing
Yeah.
stuff about it. Where are you at in it? Maybe I'll start it also.
I'm only on day 4. So, you could do like 2 in one day. You know what I mean? It's really, they're short. They're like 10 to 15 minutes each. And
Yep.
yeah, they're really, really good. I've enjoyed it so far. Today's was really, really nice. Today I wrote down some things. Today was how to disarm our bodies into trust. Like, how do we trust? If I could trust the world more fully, what would my life be? How would my life be the most different? And they kind of they have these like kind of prompts that come up, and it'll show like which percentage like everyone who's done this
Mm.
says. And mine was, I'd be less stressed and controlling. That's how I could trust the world. I mean, if my life was different, if I trusted things,
Hmm.
I would be less
What
stressed.
does this look like when you're doing this 10-day thing? Like, are you do you have to be pretty present, like with your computer answering things, or are you like, what does it look like?
It's I honestly, like, there's not many visual prompts, just at the
Okay.
end there is. So it's a meditation. So you should sit without anything. It's the same kind of deal, like
Okay.
just meditation. Yeah. So today I like laid in the sun and just sunbathed
That's so
during it.
great.
Yeah, it was really
I
nice.
talked to someone who is really into mindfulness and actually is like spent a long time like studying Reiki and energy work and all
Mm,
kind like is super knowledgeable about all this stuff. And I was telling him kind of jokingly that I feel really rebellious, like because I think probably 8 times out of 10 I lay down and meditate. It's just really like
me
grounding to be
too.
like fully I don't
Yes.
know, like my full body's like in contact with the ground or wherever I am. And, you know, a lot of guided meditations start with like, all right, sit up straight with your back, up, whatever, the whole spiel. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Nope, I'm laying down. I do the same thing, and I'm
It,
like not lying. I'm like, nope, laying down. No one needs to know.
yeah. And it's just what feels good to me. And I kind of joked with him that I was like really rebellious. And he's like, no, like a ton of people meditate laying down. And, you know, he like gave a lot of reasons why. And it was really interesting. But yeah, little
You're like, no,
side
I'm
note.
unique. You're like,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm rebellious and unique. Everyone sits. I'm the only one that lays down to feel the ground. I also did that this morning. I was like, yeah, not to get like too into it, but yeah, I was like feeling the blades of grass and, you know, just like it was just like, and the sun was like shining on me and like glistening through the trees. And I was just like, oh, I was having my moment with nature today. It was really nice.
That sounds perfect.
It was
I will
perfect.
say before we move on, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just love how intertwined like mindfulness and
Yeah.
self-care about our body, mind, and soul is with our work. Like
Mm,
the mindfulness techniques that are incorporated in the reflection of our work, the physical act of making. It's
yeah,
just really interesting. I think it's always been there for me,
yeah.
but it's nice to constantly be aware of it, talking about it, reflecting on it
Mm-hmm.
with you. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
just love it. I hope that this kind of conversation inspires other artists to be
Yeah.
more aware of how kind of spiritual, I know that's like a
Mm-hmm.
big word, the act of making anything is.
Yeah, but spiritual could mean anything. Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, but I think art making is very spiritual in general, right? We're like listening and expressing ourselves through other, I don't want to say the word entities, but we're like really channeling a lot and we're the voices to those things. And I think even when people are disconnected from that type of mindfulness, and you see some of this prolific work that comes out of certain people, and I don't know if you've ever met an artist where you're like, oh my god, this is so amazing. Then you meet them and you're like, huh, like so different, like
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I you
happened a
know, like
lot. Yeah.
yeah. And you're like, I don't think you know like how spiritual you are, you know, I don't think you know what's inside of you. And I think it's really funny, but yeah, it's
Well,
all connected.
yeah, it's really interesting. Like you recommended The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. It's on Audible. I promised that I would listen, and I did. And there's a part that
Yay.
talks about creativity and how it's, I mean, you should really go listen. But the big thing was
Yeah.
like that creativity is important for everyone, like
Yes.
actually important. And there is, what I loved about the talk is that it's not like mumbo jumbo. Like she backs everything up with research, and it's just like
Yes.
such a like bad bitch boss. Like no, like
Yeah.
what I'm saying is real, and here's why. And this
Yes.
is all to say that like creativity is important for everybody, and if you don't incorporate it in your life and embrace it, actually there's a lot of research that supports that we suffer when
Yeah.
we don't create in some way, create music, create
Yeah.
stories, create films, create paintings, like
Hmm.
whatever it is. Like
Whatever it is.
every person should be creating something. So that
Yeah.
is my message to anyone who is listening that isn't creating. Go create
Mm,
something because it's important
yeah.
factually.
You know what? I think like all of our subscribers are creatives.
Yeah,
I
I
think.
think so.
Um, yeah. So that's really interesting. But I also think that as creators, we can also be not creative. We can have this identity as a creator, but we can we can really get blocked up just like anybody else and get
Mhm.
really wrapped up on how we're going to pay the rent and how we're going to be a good partner and how we're going to like fix the car thing that broke, like we get wrapped up in that too. It's not like we're some like, holy being, but like I think I resonated with the cultivating the creativity section of her workshop a lot. And I was like, wow,
Mhm.
I didn't think I would, but I mean, I know how important it is to play within creativity, but I liked the part where she was talking about how she like uses her phone a lot to like edit videos and pictures, and she's like, I know it's
Mhm.
not a lot, but I enjoy it a lot, and I'm like taking photography now and like taking classes and like
Yeah.
pushing herself in that way. And I just think it's so cool. It's like how she talks about how like in the beginning, yeah, she was like, no, you have fun with your ART, but I have work to do.
Yes, perfect segue into what I was gonna
Yes.
say is like
Yeah.
that was another big thing is like humans like just fetishize work. Like, if you worked until midnight and only got 2 hours of sleep, it's like seen as this amazing thing, and it's not. It's like our creativity is important, is worthy, and actually like overworking yourself is not something to be proud of. Like that was a big thing she
Mm.
said, based off research and facts. It's like successful people make time to rest and they make time to
Yeah.
play and
Yes.
create. And that was something you said a long time ago, like in an early
Mm-hmm.
conversation. It's like
Mm.
you need to slow down in order to speed up. And I think about that a
Yes.
lot. It's all
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah, that was a quote from my aunt who probably got it from somebody else, somewhere. But yeah, I had that on a sticky note for a very long time, and I have to remind everybody of that. Like, hey,
Hmm.
it's good for people who are like recovering from something too. Like if you have an injury and like, yeah, because we're so obsessed with this, like we have to do this, we have to get back to work, we have to, and I really slowed down once I moved here. And this pandemic was like my reminder that I really was going to burn out if I hadn't stopped really.
Hmm.
It's hard to get back up and now and imagine myself as busy as maybe I once was before. Like it's really hard to see myself in that space, but like I'm scared of it, but also it's been a lot of time. So I feel ready and I feel a little bit more juiced up to
Yeah,
go for it. Yeah. But
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's my
I
reflection.
was thinking a lot this week, and some of our
Mm.
even subscribers and friends and family have really brought this to the forefront of my mind, which is like, my brother and Paul and some of these other people have talked about color specifically, and there's a curiosity about how you and I find color and
Mm.
how we physically like actually find the color, but also how we decide
Sure.
about color.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And, before we started recording, I was talking to Morgan about how I started this new practice of kind of documenting color in my sketchbook and color combinations and kind of breaking apart color from particular paintings that I'm working on. Like right now, I'm working on a really large painting and I'm kind of documenting the color specifically with that large painting. Um, so it's just like something I'm thinking about a lot. And it's oddly enough, as an artist, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, but um, I don't really think about it that much. It's actually really just like, for the most part, traditionally, it's like so influenced by intuition. I'm just like, I just know,
Hmm.
and that's cool too. But I kind of want to challenge us
Sure.
today to like
Yeah.
pry that open a little bit.
I'd love to do that. Do you have any initial thoughts and questions? Because I have a question now for
Oh
you
yeah,
for
yeah,
this intuitive situation. And you might need to like bring out one of the panels that you're working on for
yeah.
me to ask the question. But I am similar in that intuitive process. But lately I have switched. So I'll talk about that.
Okay.
Um, and but for you, how you just said, like, it's like you layer and you layer and you layer and you layer. And um, I don't know what my question is anymore. But like, so when you're like, okay, so for me, it's like you can put a wash on something and then you will do a layer of dots. Those will dry. You'll do another layer of dots. Then you might paint over all of that, right? So what if those dots are like this really bright magenta color? Like you might lose that completely. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess explain a little more about like how you can give that up so freely, and also what in that process for you is the work itself. Like how is that is that the work itself?
Yeah, part of it is like just trusting that it'll work out, but in trusting
But
that it's all part of the
mm,
process. But honestly, it's not, sometimes it's not even, it doesn't happen freely. Sometimes it's really heartbreaking and devastating because there's a thing
mm,
about time and labor, and you had a hope that
yeah.
maybe this painting would be like vibrant pink, and it didn't work out. It's just not working, and I have to paint it over, and it
Yes.
becomes something else. And sometimes I actually do mourn like that old idea or
Uh-huh.
that old color,
Yeah.
and it is painful sometimes. Um, I try something Rose Olson used to say when I was stuck on something. She'd be like, keep what you like and get rid of what you don't. And I wish that would work for me because and sometimes it does. I will say that sometimes it does. But a lot of times it's like, often in order to move forward, I unfortunately have to get rid of things that I really liked. Um,
Mhm.
and when I relinquish that control and kind of surrender to what the painting needs and not what I want, um, I find that the end result is more satisfying, fulfilling, more successful. Like, wow, like, thank God I poured yellow over that green because it was a gorgeous green, but it just didn't work. And I will, to bring it back around to Rose, she also said, like, you'll figure it out in the next one. And as
Mm,
as a way of saying, like, you can find that green again.
right.
And
It'll find
um,
its way back to you.
yeah, I will say, like, it's so different. Like, I could bring out like 5 different paintings, and the way I'm approaching color is going to be 5 different approaches. But I'm like dying to know your
Mm,
responses to some of these. Like, genuinely, I have appreciated your work for like
mm,
what, over a decade or something,
mm.
and watched it change. And I've never questioned like your color choices, but I'm curious to do that today. Now that it's like come to the
Okay.
forefront of my mind, I'm like
Yeah.
now dying to know.
Okay. What are
Because
you dying
similar
to
to
know?
like the
Yeah.
way I apply marks, and there's like a
Mm,
unpredictability about how color is going to operate when they're stacked on top of each other, the same applies to pouring thin washes of paint. Like, having a yellow wash over a magenta is going to create something else entirely. So there's a element of risk about color.
mhm, mhm.
So, and I'm assuming through the years of your studio practice, you can predict some things. But I'm curious how you approach color in general, and maybe I'll ask some more
Mm,
specific questions after you
okay.
answer that.
Yeah. How do I approach? Well, I think there's been years and years of like taking risks in mixing color and throwing shit down and continuing and throwing things on top of each other. And like there were years where like a lot of my paintings were really muddy and dark and greens and browns because I was mixing too much red with blue, and I was mixing too much like sepia or burnt umber versus a sepia, raw sepia color. Like there are things I just it wasn't clicking to me right away of why things were so dark. And it took time to just I had to make 100 of those paintings to then be like, oh, I wonder if I like switch this up and like add like a cadmium yellow light to this, and maybe it will like brighten things up. But the way I approach the color, like before I put it down, I generally have it already kind of stirring inside of me. It could and for many, many years, I didn't know where they could have come from, right? They could have been from like a little corner of a building that I saw a couple colors from. And I'm like, that's a cool combination. And you just kind of like store it somewhere. And then like when you're in the studio, you might remember that moment and say, oh, I want to start a painting with this bright turquoise, and then throw in a mustard yellow because of that building, And so there's that portion of me approaching color, and then I throw it down without the starting a painting is definitely like the less risk. Like it's the most fun, process for me.
Yeah, same.
Because you don't have to really think too much. You just get to put the color down, and it's that first initial color that I will ruminate on for a while before I put it down. I'll say, ooh, one painting in particular that I started and finished recently, it was all an ode to like the textures and the colors that I've gained from living in Gloucester, and like specifically going to Flat Rocks for like sunset every single night and like looking down, and these rocks are pink. I mean, pink. And in certain times of the sunset setting, they'll change color into a maroon, and they just stick with me. And I like can't stop thinking about them. So I'll be like, oh, I can't wait to go in the studio and start a painting that's that pink. Like that's that color. And because I've mixed color so much, I know how to get that color immediately. I'm like, okay. And like I do it and I'm like, well, that's good. That's exactly what I wanted. But it doesn't always act like it. It's more often now like than it, but I used to have to really work at it and say, oh, it's just not right. Like there's just not something right about that pink. Let's add more yellow to this. Like let's add, let's just see. And I don't really use photographs as reference in the studio. Like I just don't. I keep it stored and I want it from my memory exactly. So those are some approaches to color that I.
Why do you think, like, I guess my assumption when you say that is that there is more opportunity, maybe just period, there's more opportunity when the studio practice has less rules and it's less rigid. That's kind of what I was assuming when you said you don't use photos, but I don't know if I'm exactly like correct on that.
I take a lot of photos. A lot of photos and then look at them all night. Right. And then, so I'm taking that experience that I had. And then going into my bed and remembering that experience. I'm remembering the feeling that I'm having in that area. Why was I so drawn to that corner? Why did I take a picture of that? So all of these things are kind of like in my mind. And I guess I ask myself, like, why am I so drawn to this? But I don't overthink it. I just am like, I'm drawn to this. Okay, let's do something about it. And I do have a lot of photos that I haven't even really looked at and touched, because for me, it's more about like doing that right away, like doing that in the process of what I'm going through. It's very like, oh, I had that feeling. Okay, let's go paint about it right away. There's not much that like, I don't think about like, oh, 2 years ago I did this. And I remember this color. Sometimes that happens, but does that answer your question?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we got a Wednesday.
Hi, Wednesday.
We got one question about specifically like how you approach a blank. Is my audio kind of glitching? No, okay. It's just Wednesday then. That's like,
it's just Wednesday. Like pushing things around.
Yeah. We got a question about how you approach a blank canvas. And what I gathered from you talking about your own practice is that it's the first color. It's like the first color. I wrote this down. It's the first color that guides you, meaning like maybe the example you use, like it's that particular pink that you kind of took in from the day that you start with. And then it's like a free for all. Like there's no other force like, oh, I also want to capture the moss that was on those pink rocks, or are there some other kind of
There are.
influences? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like I'll usually think of one color in conjunction with another. So I'm saying,
Oh,
okay, if I'm going to do pink, what color? Obviously it's green, right? Because pink and green, it's just the way that the world goes round. And it's so one is speaking to the other like perfectly. So obviously it's going to be green. And then I think about, I think about the like green sludge that's in the water in the tide pools, like next to this pink rock. And I also think about the raw and like rusty sienna that was on the walk to get there, that had this dirt that was like under my feet as I'm walking to get there. And so I do start thinking about the entire
memory.
landscape and the memory of that place. And then but I don't, for as in terms of composition and stuff, that's like a completely different conversation. But in terms of
Mm,
color, like, yeah, the first color is so freeing. It's like, let's put this down, right? And so I'll put it down, and I'm like, it's so fun. You move it around, you find the shape it's going to be, and then you're like, ooh, am I going to take a risk and throw down another color while this is still wet? Or am I going to let this dry and then see what the transparency is going to be with another color layered on top of it? And lately I've been not waiting. I've been just putting on another color and seeing how they blend and watching them blend. And and then try to get them to dry fast so that I can continue working on it.
isn't it funny that like we both primarily use acrylic paint, and I share the same feeling of like, can't this dry quicker? And like acrylic
Oh
paint
my
is the
God.
quickest drying paint there is. I'm
But
like,
like
I need it faster.
I use so much paint. Like I will pour like I'll squeeze like half a bottle, a half a tube of like a color in and another half a tube. And then I'll add like this much medium and then
Mhm.
this much water. And I'm like stirring and stirring and stirring and stirring and stirring. And a lot of what I've loved about this process is watching the color change as I go. And then
Mm,
I leave little bits of like paint that isn't fully mixed yet. And this is if I'm using tube color.
yeah.
And I'll leave those little chunks so that when I pour it, those chunks remain and they leave this texture and they leave this like raised, almost like your dots, like, but they're
Mhm.
flowing from my natural pour state. And then I leave them there. And then when I pour another color on top of them, those little beads of color get reactivated. So they start like bleeding into this other color. So it's really just fun to watch
Yeah.
the reaction of these pigments. And I think I'm definitely way more involved in the medium itself and how it reacts to one another and how the colors are reacting in that process. It's not
Hmm.
really about the end result right away. I'm like, ooh,
Right.
how can I have fun with this color and this texture in this process? And how can I push the boundaries a little bit?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, is it sounds like real play, real
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
in the beginning, and that's the same
So,
experience for me. It's so hard, like I desperately want to stay focused on the topic of color, but it's like inevitably when you talk about your practice, it's like I want to know about everything. Like immediately when you talked about how color was influenced by a place or a
mm-hmm.
memory,
Mm-hmm.
I think about, or I wonder about how you attach language to a memory, like where your titles come from. And, um, I just have like so many, all these other questions about like your art making practice in particular, but um, I don't know. Maybe you could answer that question really quick.
I'll answer quick.
Okay.
I have struggled with titles forever because I just always like we've had conversations about us being really insecure about our like the way we write and jot things down and if we're smart enough, if we're not smart enough, like what is this? So I
Mm,
started to become really actual, just like obvious now about I now put like the location
Hmm.
where it's from, maybe the time of the day, it's like a really long title, or it's just
Oh.
like my title would be Gloucester.
Hmm.
And I think about like, because I'm thinking about all the different textures and the color of that one place. I'm like, oh, this is Gloucester. I don't overthink it anymore. So that's, yeah, that's like kind of, if it's a memory, if it's more of a painting that I'm like really focused on, God, sorry also for this like washout. But if I'm thinking about a memory and I'm painting in regards to a dream or this kind of image that keeps popping up in my mind, or these color combinations that I can't let go of and I just get it down, those are the hardest to title. And I often think that they come from, I have like a list on my phone of like all these like things that come to my head, these like one liners or these like moments in my day where I'm like, oh, that would be a really good title. Or I'm thinking about a memory in the past, like for example, like walking through the woods or something, not walking, it's so lame, but like walking through Graham's Field, and I'm thinking about this like really interesting, like light green color of this tall grass that I was like, would run through as a kid, and so like those kind of specific memories would be just what it is. I just become more obvious with the title. So it gives more of a story and a narration of like what this is all about.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering too, like, there's an obvious intention to play and explore and take risks
Mm,
with color in the beginning.
yeah.
But at what point does that change and influence color for you? And also, what happens
Yeah.
if you feel like you made a mistake?
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. You're like interviewing me right now. Um
I'm like genuinely curious. These are
I
like
know you
genuine.
are. It's like so genuine. I'm like, wow, he really wants to know. Um okay, the question was how, okay, yeah. So the colors can be influenced from a past memory. I was working on this painting of Gloucester, but then once I put down a specific color, I remember I remembered this color that I saw on a previous walk in Long Island of the summer before. And I was like, oh, I remember this really like disgusting, like bubbly, greeny, mossy, polleny gunk on top of this layered on top of the ocean. This color that I just made reminded me of something else. So then I would go back on my phone and be like, oh my god, yes, it looks exactly like that. And so I think my subconscious kind of comes through in some of these things, and I'm able to remember, oh, that moment that I was really attached to years ago. I then subconsciously create, and when I pour it down, or if I'm painting it, I'm like, oh, like this is reminding me of something that I've already experienced. And then other times, like when I'm beginning a painting, lately I've just been putting like white down first, because my new exploration is um really large. You know how I always take photographs of pieces of
Mhm.
my paintings, and I'm trying to like take those pieces and zoom them out and make them really big, and just focusing on like two or three intersections of color,
Mhm.
really simplifying, really trying to not overcomplicate it, and just really focus on the thing that I'm so interested in, which is the intersections of color and where things meet. And so in doing that, I start with white, and I start with a shape, let that dry, and then I pour a color on top of that white. Whether or not it's fully dry or not, some things might activate that white to come through and make it really milky. And I'm like, ooh, I really want this milk today. I really want the milkiness today. So I'll keep the white a little damp, and then I'll pour the color on.
It's the
Or I'll let it,
milkiness for me.
it's the milky puddle for me. Um, seriously, I take so many pictures of milky puddles. It's like gross. I'm like, what was on my phone? If anyone looked at my phone, they're like, what's up with you? And dirt and like mud. Um, but there's this like, and where I'll let it dry, and I'll leave a really thick texture to it. So then I'm pouring on, and the texture is coming through. And then I'm starting
Mhm.
to play with texture and color at the same time.
What do you do if you feel like something goes wrong or you made a mistake? How do
Oh
you
yeah.
approach that?
Oh, I get so devastated. I'm like, I thought I was a good painter, and now I'm not. Now
Questioning
it's
everything, like.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. I go into like full on panic mode. I'm like, shit, I thought I knew color. I really did. And this really happens more along when I'm getting a commission or someone has tried to
There's
like,
pressure.
yeah, there's pressure. And so I'm like over complicating things just so I can figure them out even more. And I'm like, oh shit. I should have known that pink covering, or I should have known that blue covering that um, sepia rust would turn purple underneath. Like I should have known that. And then I'm like, fuck, they don't want that. I need to change this. But actually, I think it's really cool. So can I keep it? Should I take it away? So in those
Mm,
mistakes, I actually discover more. And I then sometimes I write them down. And sometimes though, I'll just fucking remember. I'll take a picture of it and I'll just
yeah.
remember. I'll be like, wow, that just made that iridescently purple. Okay. Didn't know that before, but now I do. And if I really think it's detrimental to the painting, like not, I will get rid of it. But like you said about Rose saying, keep the parts you like and just take away the ones that you don't. That doesn't work for me either, because usually I'm working, the way that I work is like I'll make a mark here, and if it doesn't work, even though I know I'm going to like be shifting it, if there's a specific shape in mind that I want, I'll change the bottom corner to match that top corner at the same time. So it's always changing, always evolving. It's not like I'm working out one piece at a time. And
Right.
so, like, if something I don't like, I'll take it away, but then something then won't work, like over in this corner. And I'm like, fuck, like, okay, like
Yep.
now that I took that away, I have to take this beautiful moment away. And it's really heartbreaking, like you said, because it just doesn't, I don't know how to further explain what works and what doesn't work. I think I just know in my heart, like, I guess it's just our training, I suppose, that makes us understand
Yeah,
and
and
know that things aren't going to work.
intuition
Yeah,
and an
intuition,
aesthetic,
instinctual.
like that you're guided by, like, and it's different for everyone, like,
Yeah.
right? Like what you think looks good is so different from what other people are looking for and what they believe looks
Yeah.
good. And
Oh, yeah.
a lot of it is kind of what you would assume. It's like, balance or maybe asymmetry or maybe
Mm-hmm.
like some vibrance is what you're looking for, or minimal, like,
Exactly.
it's like whatever's guiding you, it's going to change depending on who you are as an artist and what you're trying to make. And it's really hard to kind of sum up that particular thing, like what
Right.
what is correct, what is right in terms of color is going to depend so greatly from artist to artist. But
It is. Yeah.
what's so cool about this is that I assumed, given the nature of how, I guess, I thought how different our work was, I just thought that our answers to a lot of these questions would be so different, but they're actually kind of all or mostly the same. Like,
Yeah.
um, I
Yeah.
wrote down like the first color guides me. And that's so similar to me. Like this painting, I didn't even think we were going to talk about color today, but this is like a good, really easy thing to talk about because it's
Yeah.
on the wall right now. Like,
Mhm.
I promise if you go on my website and look for a blue painting, you probably won't find one. I love blue, and funny enough, if you do that exercise, every painting you see will probably have blue in it. Um, I love using blue, and I use it all the time, but I haven't really made like a true like dominantly blue painting, and that's kind of how like my paintings operate and how I talk about them. If you listen to the or watch the vlogs or read the blogs, like I kind of talk about them like that, like, oh, the yellow painting that I'm working on, like of course the yellow painting has purple and gray and blue, and but it's dominantly yellow, so I speak about it like that's the yellow painting. um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and yeah, that's just kind of how they usually work. Mostly it's like maybe because I'm really influenced by minimalism, that from a distance it kind of reads as one color or maybe two. For a long time I was interested in like complementary colors like blue and orange, but of
Mhm.
course mixing them, especially in like a pointillist way, creates like something that's neither blue or orange.
Yeah,
That
it
makes
does.
sense.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yep.
um but bringing it back to this painting, like I really wanted to do that, like simply, like that's where color is coming from. Like
Yeah.
I want to make a blue painting.
Mhm.
Now it might not happen because I've done that before and it's turned out to be a pink painting or a yellow or whatever,
So,
but that's my intention with color with this. And it's like literally one coat of paint on there and there's going to be a million. So
okay, so what would be your next step? What, going back into that painting, like what's your first instinct to do?
the next probably three steps are just going to be layering color in a way that I can't really identify brushstrokes. There's something weird about that for me. Like I right now I can see where I've been on that surface and it's probably hard to tell
Okay.
from a
The
distance, but
trace it. No, I can see the traces
yeah.
of your mark making
So
and the yeah, motion of your hand.
yeah, the next few steps will be like sanding, layering a thin, another thin coat of blue, sanding. Maybe I'll do some
Mhm.
pours because there's something I like about the unpredictability of like a pour, like the way
Oh
the
my
color
God.
kind of dissipates. I don't really like to manipulate color
Yeah.
a lot, and that's why I
Yeah.
like my mark making because it's more like stamping. I'm not like like finessing the brush. It's like a very definitive mark, and
Okay. Yeah.
um, the marks are actually really inconsistent. They're not circular, so um, yeah, the next few steps are going to be to build the blue. And then
Mm.
I was going to say something that kind of differs from us is I'm really influenced by collage, and collage is always found somewhere. Like this
Yeah.
particular painting has these huge text messages, text bubbles that are blue, and they're printed on fabric. And I like that blue color. So it was kind of a double, like I want to make a blue painting and I have these
Mhm.
blue text bubbles. So
Mhm.
all or most of the time, color comes from what I have,
Yes.
meaning like maybe I have a handwritten letter that's written on yellow paper with red ink. Like the painting is probably going to have a lot of red and yellow. The color comes from like the
Mm.
thing, like the content,
The
the
surface.
memory,
Yeah. Okay.
like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
described too.
Yeah.
Except it's literally in front of me, like that particular yellow on that
Sure.
aged paper.
Okay. So sometimes you're ready to create, you're ready to start, and this color is just right in front of you, and you're like, yeah, this one right now.
Hmm.
Because,
Most of the time, yeah, I can
yeah,
trace it back to like
yeah.
so many. There's like a red painting with like red fabric that I applied on. Like
Mm-hmm.
the color, I'm not necessarily mixing it, it's found and it's in front of me. And then I respond, like
Mm,
whether or not the
yeah,
painting is going
right.
to
You
end up being
respond.
red, like
Yeah,
maybe the red is going to influence me
yeah.
to apply blue. Like there's always blue somewhere in a
Right.
painting. And
Yeah, yeah.
then once I do that, it totally transformed. But initially, most of the time, it comes from collage.
Wow. Yeah, so that is something that does differ, but I can relate to the response to something that's already there.
Right.
And um like I talked about this in one of my blogs where I used this really bright magenta pink paint that I normally don't really use, but it was right there in front of me and I was really bored at what I was doing, and that color was really representing like a lot of energy and excitement, and I needed that what where I was working on something like an artist statement, right? And I was like just sitting there and I was like, I really just want to play with this right now. And I was actually, I felt like quite young in that moment, and I just
Hmm.
said fuck it, I'm just gonna do it, and I'll kind of explode with that one color. And I
Yeah.
mixed like a magenta with this like other magenta, and I made a really bright thing, and I just splashed it on top. And then I'm curious to know like when that meditative process for the dots come in for you, because my meditative process is after a really big pour. I will work on that pour for like 30 minutes, guiding it with my finger, moving the canvas on the floor, like picking it up and like pouring it and like making sure it's not like going out of the way that like I
Mm.
want it to go in. Sometimes I lose control over that. And that's also fun / annoying / heartbreaking when things don't go my way. But the response to what's already there in front of you happens to me a lot
You
too.
know, like there's so many different directions of how I could respond to
Yeah, I know.
what you just said, but gosh, like yeah, I wanted to say something about like kind of surrendering to color and the things that don't work out. Because I would say a lot of times it doesn't in the middle stage
Oh,
where like
yeah.
you're transitioning from play. Because our experience is the exact same when we started painting. Like I did a time lapse in my most recent vlog of this, and like you can see me, I'm just like cutting up random fabric and like I didn't even mix this blue like in a palette. I was just like squirting the blue on the
Yeah,
surface and like
I
it's like pure joy. And
yeah,
people have
yeah.
seen it over and over in the vlogs, which is
Mhm.
why I love making them even for me because you start
Mm.
to notice patterns and you know like that big triptych. I was working on one on the floor, same thing, like splashing paint everywhere. I didn't even use a brush. I was using my hands and like moving my hands around. And
Mhm.
but at a certain point, you have to transition from not really thinking at all to considering relationships and a certain goal about color
Mhm.
composition and everything. So that's kind of what you're talking about is that
Mhm.
middle point.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I mess up, honestly. And
Yeah.
actually it's kind of great when that happens because it always leads to something I would argue that's better.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Like
And
I'll be
same
like
thing.
so convinced, like, all right, this is gonna be a blue painting. However, the next step, like I'm
Mhm.
gonna do like this grid of like pink, but I'm gonna wash over the pink. And like once I apply dots over the pink, it's gonna be blue anyway. Um, but that
So,
goal might not happen. It like the pink,
yeah,
this might actually be all pink.
so you right, so you might have an agenda for it, but in that process while you're working on it, we're just reacting to
What's there?
what's there. And I do the same thing with a painting when I'm first approaching it. And if I like have sometimes I like have these paintings in my mind before I fall asleep and I'm like, okay, let's like remember that. And I'll remember it as soon as I wake up. It's still living in my head. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm going to paint that. There are I think I've done that like a few times where I'm like gone into my studio, started that painting that's been in my head and then stepped away from it and stopped working on it. But that's only a couple times. The most of the time it's um okay, I did it, got it out of my system. Now I must react to what's already down there and it
Right.
will change.
That's
Yeah.
what I was going to ask you is like, have you ever successfully accomplished that mission of like, because I've done that too. I've basically
Yeah.
made a painting in my mind and like
Mhm.
that looks so cool. Like I want to make that,
Mhm.
but I've never successfully made the painting in my mind. It's always led to
Yeah.
something else.
I did it recently. It was so minimalistic that I'm like, do I keep going or do I just do it? If I just
Hmm.
like keep it and I've kept it ever since. And I poured a shape with water on top of the canvas. And on the
Hmm.
canvas, I pre-stretched it and I only put like one or two like soft watery layers of gesso. So it wasn't like totally going to bounce back. There was going to be some sinking staining going on,
Hmm.
but I wanted the surface to be wet. And then I took a brush and like dipped it into this like bright orange that was a liquid golden color. So I got the brush like nice and wet, the surface is wet, and I just like drew a line and it spread, the orange just spread because I just wanted to watch this happen.
Hmm.
And then what I wanted to do is take this bright orange and do the same thing and watch them bleed in together and then just let it dry. And I kept it.
What is the scale of it like
It's
of these
like a
marks?
medium. It's just like a medium-sized painting. Like I would say, like 20 by 30,
Hmm.
and it's vertical. and the shape is just this, like, you might have seen it like some of the videos, or I might have talked about it. um it's almost like a sail shape. Like it's
Hmm.
just one shape and it's dominating the entire thing. There's like some white space around it, but it's mostly just the shape in the center,
Hmm.
maybe more to the right.
I'm so curious to see that.
Yeah, okay, I'll post it.
Yeah, I grabbed this just as a good example
Yeah,
of a
yeah.
finished painting. You can kind of see like
Mm.
the background. Maybe actually you can't, I don't know, but the background is this really cool mint green color. And I thought the whole painting would be like this really amazing, like mint. And
Yeah,
I was really
yeah,
excited by it. And I use pink so fucking. There's certain colors. That's a question I want to get to. Is like,
yeah.
why don't you use
Yes,
certain colors? And like
yes.
mine, I always use like.
Yeah,
I think 90% of my work is like yellow paintings and pink paintings. Like, and I use tons of color. Like, there's always blue. There's
me
always
too.
like other colors. But
Yeah.
if you look at the painting dominantly, there's probably yellow or pink. And I'm on a major yellow kick right now. But
Yes. Oh my God,
when I
I
was making
so
this,
want to
I'm
use
like,
yellow.
I'm not going to use pink at all. I literally am challenging myself not to do that because it's like a
Mhm.
go-to crutch thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to really bring out these like greens, and didn't happen. Like tons of pink, tons of red,
I see
and
that.
purple,
Mm.
and that's just a really good example of like I had this plan of layering this like mint green, and there's some collage that's like green, so it was all kind of building. And I was looking at it for a long time, especially if you look at some vlogs, there's like five
Yeah.
weeks of this painting staying the exact same, and I didn't want to do anything because I loved it. Like I love that color, but there was no way to move forward unless I gave up some of what I really liked. And that was
Mhm.
like layering some of this yellow, the purple, the pink. And
Yeah.
when I look at this, I don't think about what could have been. I just appreciate what is. And I really love
Mm.
this painting. Like I kind of listened to that intuition we talked about,
Yeah.
and that was telling me like to make certain color decisions along with the mint green. And I'm really happy
You still
with.
kept it pretty
Yeah,
dominant,
yeah,
I would
yeah,
say.
yeah.
So you
It's
still
there.
filled that request for yourself, um, but in that process reacted to the colors that you were putting down and in your intuitive way. And
Hmm.
I, so you don't manipulate the colors really. You look at the tube color and that excites you and you say, I'm going to use this color. Is that always how it's been for you, or do you choose to mix certain things?
I would say pretty much everything is mixed, and that may be
Okay.
like a. I'm not really. I've questioned that a little bit. Like maybe it's fueled by ego. Like I have to manipulate it in some way, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
really minimal. Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's actually this painting is like everything is like majorly mixed. Like this is like this like peachy, orangey, pink, like not quite pink, not quite
Mm-hmm.
orange.
Mm-hmm. Flesh.
There's like I love like fleshy pink.
Me too.
Um, in
It
like the
really comes
mint,
so forward. Like
yeah,
anything with flesh comes so
yeah.
forward.
The
And
mint is like this like
yeah.
blue and green together, white also to like
Yeah.
brighten it.
Okay. So
Um, but it's interesting. A lot of the work is like super saturated, so it kind of
yeah.
reads like out of the tube. And I realize like a lot of the times it has to be because the way I apply the paint, like I can't realistically stack like a burnt umber, black, brown, like, like three dots. It's just, there isn't enough contrast to have anything magical happen in terms of color mixing. Like
Yeah.
the way traditional pointillist, that's the whole point of it, is like you're using
Yeah.
these crazy colors in
Right.
close proximity for the colors to like visually mix.
Yeah.
So most, I guess it's a long way of answering your question and saying like most of the time they are pretty saturated, not always, but a lot of the time. And it's the the point is for the color to visually mix instead of
Mm-hmm.
me mixing that brown or black or
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that I gravitate to one color at a time. And right now I'm gravitating to the rusts, the yellows, the pinks, the golds, yeah, and green again. And green was really dominant when I first began these kind of swooping landscapes that I used to paint more formally. And they're entering into my system, where before it was like I went through a blue phase and I would just like grab any blue and I'm like, I'm gonna use every single blue that I could find: brilliant blue, aquamarine, phthalo blue, ultramarine, um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, all of the blue, the green, the phthalo green mixed with white makes such a good mint. Like, oh my God, obsessed. So there are these colors that I'll definitely gravitate towards for a while. Like if I'm going to start a painting and I'm like, I don't really have much of an idea. I just need to start. I just need to express myself. I just need to get this off my chest and get out. I'll grab all of the sepia tones and mix this really deep rust color, and I'll start there.
Hmm.
And then I might pour a really light color on top of it, and it will be like gone in the next few sessions.
It sounds like you like colors are almost like seasons, like you kind of experience them for a period of time and then you move on to another
Yeah,
thing.
I do.
I'm wondering, and I actually am the same way.
Yeah.
Like similarly, like blue and orange was a big thing. Like
Oh my
if you, I
God.
don't know what years, but if you go back, there's like a million blue and orange paintings. Um, and then you just kind of exhaust it, right? Like you're obsessed, and then it's like music. Like you just, there's a new song out.
Yeah, exactly. And, my blue and orange phase that I had was I was entering into my Vermont residency, and I was like there for a while. And I was like, you know what? I just want to like push these colors as far as I can go. Like, so I like made these like huge long tapestries of canvas, and I made like these curtains, basically like 6 colors of each. I made 6 huge curtains of orange, and I just painted orange for an afternoon, and then I painted all of the blue ones like this in the night, and I just spent time with that one color over and over and over again with these huge pieces of canvas. And just because I wanted to live with that color for a really long time and work with
Mhm.
them for hours at a time, just that one color without any interaction with another. Because I wanted to like, maybe I wanted to just get to know the obsession more and understand why these two colors were like something I was really drawn to. So
Mhm.
yeah, I got I got out that phase pretty quickly after painting that many canvases of blue and pink,
Yeah,
yeah, and
because you
orange.
got a chance to explore it fully, like to
Mm-hmm.
its like edge to edge, like
Yeah, and like I could never have time. The thing about residency is like I never do that now.
right.
Like I would never
Yeah.
like it wouldn't be a waste of time, that's for sure. But like you definitely consider like that was an entire day, or actually entire 3 days of just painting blue and orange.
Yeah.
Which like I gotta do that shit still now though. I have to. Like that's the work.
Are there certain colors you don't gravitate towards, or even maybe
Mm,
accidentally avoid?
no.
Really? Can you talk about that more?
Mm. Like there's colors I don't prominently like. Like there's like this like naphthalene
No.
red or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
what it's called? That color I don't really love. But I
I
love
don't
it
see a lot of
mixed.
reds in your
There's not a lot of red.
yeah,
So there's not like a dominant red, but I use a lot of cadmium red
right.
light, and I mix it with white and make a pink, or I mix it with
Hmm.
things to make a flush tone out of. So I use a lot of cadmium red, and it's just not a prominent dominant color. It's just mixed in with a lot of the tones that I use.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah.
I pretty much use them all, and I now have this awareness about the colors I kind of avoid, so I intentionally use them, but for the most part, like, I don't really use red that much. I almost never use purple.
That's what I
Uh,
was going to say too. Purple is I don't make dominant purple paintings.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
pink and yellow are always really, really big for me. Green, I almost never use. Like, there are
Mm,
definitely, like, I realize there are definitely colors I gravitate towards. And I was curious, like, where does that stuff come from? Like, I think as an artist, for the most part, you kind of should use everything and challenge yourself. And so, yeah, the painting I just showed has purple and green, and I try and push myself to use colors that are uncomfortable, which is a good segue. Like, I have thought about your work sometimes. Maybe you've posted
mm,
like sneak peeks or something that were monochromatic, and I was like, wow, like it would be so cool to see a Morgan painting that was like literally black and white and gray. Like, what would that even be like?
mm-hmm.
Would there be more texture because there is an absence of color? Would there, like, how do you approach value? Like, I've thought
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
with your work, and
Yeah.
I
I do
think
too.
about, oh, really? I think
Yeah.
about with my own work, you'll see every now and again I'll come out with like one black painting, like probably maybe I
Yes.
make one or two a year or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like all predominantly black, some gray, maybe a little bit of white, or predominantly
Yeah.
white with a little bit of gray, whatever. Um, those are really forced for me, like, and I find that I enjoy making them a bit less. And I
Mm,
assume that there's a risk and play and excitement about what is going to happen when I stack purple on top of green on top of pink. I have no fucking clue. Where like black, gray, and white, when I restrict myself to
mm,
something that's more exploring value over color, it's, in all honesty, a bit less enjoyable. However, when I force myself to do it and I look at the final thing, I'm like, this is so cool. So there is
mm.
something to be said about pushing yourself to do something that
Yes.
maybe
Like,
you're not like
yeah.
as excited by,
Mm-hmm.
and you do it, and the end result is something that you are
Yeah.
excited by. So I'm
And
curious
it's just
about
a
that.
minimal, yeah. Yeah. It's a minimal experience. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like a lot of these paintings that I have in my head that I haven't made yet are really minimal, like black and white, or like a really like gray, white, blue, not blue, but like a Payne's gray blue, and
Hmm.
like really like slate rock color. And mostly white in my head because I've been really using a lot of white lately, and like a lot of like ghost like transparencies and really ghosting things out. So it's shifting my perspective. And then also I have a plan to um I have a friend who does these like really big bonfires, and they are like, you should come and use the charcoal from the fires to make like on site paintings with the charcoal. And I've been really wanting to do more of the like on land using raw land materials. But that would be like me using charcoal and then probably implementing like some white and grays and maybe like one color.
Yep.
But the color has to be very right because I can't just introduce a third color. For me, I would be like, okay, now that I'm introducing this color, I'm going to get like color happy and like really like go off and do my thing where I'm reacting to that color. But if I
Hmm.
think to myself, okay, this is going to stay minimal, I'm really, really interested to see like what that means for me. Um, and yeah, I really do want to explore that. I haven't yet been really minimal unless, there was a painting I just finished that I was talking about Gloucester, and it was like predominantly green, pink, and this like mustardy rust color. And like that's all I could see. I knew there was purple in there. I knew there was I don't know, browns and all of these different reds and like pieces of white and things like that. But like to me, I just saw three colors and it was really bothersome to me. And I was like, this is
Mm.
too much of these three colors. And so I guess it's just preference. But yeah, I'm really interested to like push myself to see, okay. But that was like not on purpose. That was like an accident. And I'm like, shit, this is all three colors. This is all I see. And it would really annoy me. But like if I were to go into something saying, hey, I'm just gonna use these three, I wonder how that would really go about.
Right. I feel like most of this conversation was led by like we are in tune with our intuition and we feel the balance. We know when it's right. We choose color like out of what feels natural and what our aesthetics are, and all these things that are kind of centered around like what feels right. And it's interesting kind of to leave on a note of like, what happens when you lead with what doesn't feel comfortable or what doesn't feel right? And what if you lead with choosing color that you don't want to? Like that's kind of another interesting conversation.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I kind of like did that like with that magenta color. Like that was a reaction. That was like definitely a reaction. And I was like, ooh, oh no, oh no, 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 no. Like, what do I do now? And I'm like, I'm like watching myself like put white all over it, like trying to like dull it out. And like the pink that I used kept like seeping through the white. I was like, you want to be seen, don't you? I'm like, damn it. Now I'm stuck with this magenta painting that I am in a place where, and I'll put this on my blog that I'll post. It's in a place where there's like one section that's like really muddy and like it's not working. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. You know, like there are things that sometimes I don't know what happened. And I'm like, I don't think I can fix this.
Well, what happens when you can't fix something?
Oh, I'll make it work. I'll fix it.
You feel like you always make it work.
Yeah, for things like this specific thing where it could be like rectified by like what's hard with what I'm talking about is like these specific, it depends on the surface. So if the surface is really lightly gessoed, it's harder to make these changes because it's so stained that whatever you stain on top of that will come back up. It will resurface. There's nothing that I can do unless I've been using gesso to like really just try to start over, try to prime the entire section that I'm trying to change. But that's a bit risky. But like I always need to figure it out, like no matter what. Like it's not like, oh, let's go another direction. It's like, no, I'm going to like figure out what went wrong here. And then I'm going to learn from that.
Wow, I give up on a lot of paintings. I will say, like a lot of them don't make it. Like I reach a point where I'm like,
like, what do you mean?
I just can't figure this out. And a lot of, oh man, I can think of so many examples. Like there was that like purple painting that was that small square for a long time, which is now that turquoise painting.
Oh my gosh, it was purple. It was like,
yeah. And I was like, how cool would it be to like push myself, like I'm gonna make this work? And I'm like, no, it's not working. I don't want it. It's just, I don't want it. So I give up a lot of layers, a lot of time, a lot of color. And choosing when to give up is sometimes challenging, but
so when you're giving that up, so but you've been looking at that for months, right? Like without touching it. So the only time I will give up something like that is if something's been sitting and I've forgotten about all the time that I had put into it from before. That's the only time that I can be like, okay, I'm starting over.
That's key. Because you're right, like time, if it's like the next day, like there's no fucking way I'm gonna give up. Like I worked months and months and months and I can physically see labor. Like there's no way. But if I struggle, actually like that yellow painting that I finished relatively recently, that was like bright red and blue.
Lover?
And, and tons and tons of work, tons of collage, tons of layering. There was actually a point when it was like red and blue that I thought it was done. And I looked at it for a long time, made some weird changes, and then finally literally just collage over the whole thing. So it's not even necessarily paint where there's some texture showing through. It's literally like gone. And those decisions are hard, but they're made easier when time's gone by. So you're like, I forgot like how much
Yeah.
time went into it.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Forgot. Wow. Yeah. It's just so funny how, but it needs to be the right amount of time. It can't,
Yeah.
it's like it needs to be a long time for me.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't know how you feel about this, but I get a bit anxious. Like maybe it's just where they exist. Like they're kind of
Mm.
haunting me. Like I
Oh,
know
yeah.
these
I turn
small
them.
panels have been up for so fucking long in the same exact
Oh,
state, and
I know.
it's
Yeah.
like
I turn them around.
that's like that honestly is like a good suggestion.
I'm
Maybe
like,
I'll
don't
do
look
that.
at me. Like, I literally just like, don't look at me. Like, I'm not ready for you yet.
Because it's hard. Yeah, haunting is like the best word I can
Yeah.
think
They
of. Like, I'm
haunt.
like, I just
Yes.
don't know what to do with you. Like, I genuinely don't know. So I
Okay. The
can't.
worst. Okay. Okay. I don't know. So when people visit my studio, the worst part is they'll like be like, can I like look through? And then they're like looking and they're like, oh my God, I like love that. I'm like, oh my God, please don't talk about that. Like you like as if they know where I'm at with this, like in this relationship with this piece. I'm like, oh yeah. I'm pretty honest. I'm like, I honestly don't know what's going on with that. And they're like, oh, I love like what it is. And sometimes people are like, I've had like one or two marks and they're like, oh my gosh, it's done. And I'm
Hmm.
like, what are you even saying to me? Get out. Like, get out of
Wow.
my studio. You have no idea what you're talking about. But then I'm like, I look at it, I'm like, are they sure? Are they right? Am I wrong in this? Yeah, it's really,
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're
yeah.
going towards is like finish. Like, when is something finished? And that's so
Yeah,
common. Like,
that's,
I get that all the time.
yeah.
Like, this could totally be done. Like, no, it would never be done for me.
It's just,
Maybe for
no,
you.
yeah, like maybe for you. Would you want to buy it right now? Because it's more money because it's not finished.
I'm
That's
gonna
what I
say
should
that.
start do upcharging when
It's
people
actually
want
not
it in
finished,
that
so I'm
view.
gonna
Yeah.
have to add that
Yeah,
fee
adding that
on.
time. Yeah. The unfinished fee. Can that be a new thing? I really would love that actually. I would probably sell way more paintings that way because it takes me so long to
I
finish
sometimes,
one damn
yeah, yeah,
piece.
yeah. I sometimes think about that. Like, I
Yeah.
would never do it. It's not something that,
No.
it's not an experiment I would ever
No.
actually take on. But I sometimes think about, like, what if I totally pared back? Like, I use like a similar visual language, but like maybe a quarter of it on a surface. Like, would people
Mm,
still buy that and for the same price? And like, would they like it? But it just wouldn't be at that point. It's like not even my work. But it has crossed my mind before.
yeah. I think in like a sales job, like upselling is always the best way to go because then you get to see like will they spend $600 on this size, and if they do then that's it. Like I remember the president of Montserrat at the time when I was a senior, he was like, if you sold this painting at your senior show for this amount, then that's what you need to be selling this at. Or actually he was talking about the auction. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, that's like in a different scenario. People are just trying to like support us. They're not
Mm-hmm.
like really, they're not like, oh, this is, it's a different mentality. But he was like, please just know that like if this painting sold for $4,000, that's what you should be selling this at. And I've always like heard that ringing in my ear, ever since he said that to me. But I don't, I fluctuate all the time. I'm like,
Pricing is so
yeah,
hard. Like
I'll never
it
get it right.
it really is. And I've had such a solid understanding of what my paintings are worth for a long time, but it's kind of been shaken up by these new landscape drawings, which I'm no longer thinking of as like little sketches or ideas, but rather like this is a finished work and so
Yeah.
complete and worthy of the same amount of money as like other
Yeah.
paintings that I've spent like a year on. But
Yeah.
there are less layers and less marks, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like grappling with, I'm having like a pricing dilemma at the moment,
Yeah.
but it's not something I'm used to. Usually I'm like, no, this is how much it is.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could talk about that next time, or
Yeah.
talk about that because I would love to privately discuss this with you, this topic,
Yeah.
because I'm struggling too. So
Really?
we're like, we could just talk about color for a while, huh? I know.
I think we're probably both getting tired and it's getting late for you. So
yeah.
cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking about color with me. And it was endlessly fascinating. Like,
anytime. Like, we could get into so many different conversations.
yeah, it was hard to kind of stay on topic.
Yeah.
As always,
Yeah.
like as
Yeah,
if I've
yeah.
never said that before.
Yeah, I
Whatever.
know,
Every
right?
week I
Like,
feel
what
the
did
same
we
way.
even talk about? I know. I think so. If anyone has any added questions and any bits that you found that we didn't fully go into, please leave a comment, and we'll get back to it in the next episode, or we'll respond to your comment via text. So not text message, but the text on the Patreon account.
Yes.
So yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much.
Until next time.
Until next time.